The fluorescent lights in conference room hummed with the same indifferent drone they'd maintained for 15 years, casting everything in a flat, institutional pallor that made even living skin look embalmed. Dara Kim sat in the back row, her hospital-issued tablet balanced on her knee. Watching director Vanessa Pritchard adjust her designer glasses with manicured fingers that had never changed a bedpan or held a dying patient's hand. "I want to play something for you," Pritchard said, her voice carrying that particular corporate brightness that always preceded cruelty. "This is from yesterday's rounds in the memory care wing." She tapped her laptop. And the conference room speakers crackled to life. An elderly man's voice emerged, soft but precise, each word enunciated with careful deliberation. "The key to posterior circulation stroke intervention is the timing window. You have to understand that the basilar artery supplies the brainstem, the cerebellum, the occipital lobes. When you see the patient presenting with ataxia, dysarthria, and diplopia, you're looking at a vertebrobasilar insufficiency. The protocol requires immediate heparin administration at 80 units per kilogram bolus, followed by 18 units per kilogram per hour continuous infusion, but only after confirming hemorrhagic exclusion via non-contrast CT. The therapeutic window for mechanical thrombectomy extends to 24 hours in posterior circulation, unlike anterior circulation's 6-hour window. Because collateral flow patterns differ significantly in the vertebrobasilar system, several nurses laughed. The sound bounced off the walls like coins dropped on linoleum. Pritchard smiled, pausing the recording. "This is what we call confused rambling." Medical word salad from someone who probably watched too much Grey's Anatomy. More laughter, louder now, permission granted. "This is Mr. Crane in room 247. He does this constantly. Talks about surgeries, procedures, medications. Very convincing if you don't know better." Dara's pen had stopped moving. She stared at her tablet, at the notes she'd been taking, at the single word she'd written. "Specific. The point is," Pritchard continued, walking to the front of the room with her hands clasped like a teacher addressing slow students. "We cannot indulge these delusions. When residents start spinning these elaborate fantasies, the worst thing we can do is play along. It reinforces the neural pathways of confusion. When Mr. Crane starts talking about his surgical techniques, you redirect, you don't engage. You don't ask follow-up questions. You certainly don't waste time entertaining the idea that an elderly black man with documented dementia was somehow a neurosurgeon," the way she said it. The casual certainty, the assumption that the impossibility was self-evident. Dara felt something cold settle in her stomach. The same feeling she'd had 3 years ago when her grandmother kept insisting the night nurse was stealing her pain medication. Everyone said Halmoni was confused. Everyone said dementia patients made accusations. 2 weeks after her grandmother died, the night nurse was arrested for diverting opioids from 17 patients. Questions? Pritchard scanned the room with the confidence of someone who'd never been meaningfully challenged. Dara kept her hand down, her mouth shut, but her mind kept replaying that recording. Heparin dosages, therapeutic windows, collateral flow patterns in the vertebrobasilar system. That wasn't Grey's Anatomy. That was textbook neurology, the kind she'd studied for her critical care certification. The meeting dissolved into the usual administrative tedium, medication schedules, dietary restrictions, a reminder about the employee appreciation pizza party on Friday. As if pepperoni could substitute for adequate staffing ratios. Dara waited until the hallways cleared before taking the stairs to the second floor. The smell hit her before she reached the landing, industrial sanitizer trying to mask urine and boiled vegetables. The walls were painted that particular shade of institutional beige that appeared in every facility she'd ever worked. As if someone had decided that elderly people didn't deserve color. Room 247 was at the end of the hall. She knocked twice, soft. "Come in." Octavius Crane sat in the chair by the window, a medical journal open on his lap. The afternoon light caught his reading glasses, the chain glinting gold against his cardigan. His hands trembled slightly as he turned a page, but his eyes were sharp, focused. Tracking the text with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading research papers. "Mr. Crane," Dara said, closing the door behind her. "I'm Dara. I'm one of the nurses here. I know who you are." His voice was the same one from the recording, gentle but precise. "You're the one who actually reads the charts before administering medications. The one who noticed Mrs. Patterson's potassium levels were trending dangerous before anyone else did." Dara felt heat rise to her face. "I just pay attention, so few people do." He closed the journal, marking his place with a leather bookmark that looked decades old. "What can I do for you, Nurse Kim?" She pulled the visitor's chair closer, sat down so they were eye level. Outside, someone's television played a game show, the canned laughter seeping through the walls. "I heard the recording director, Pritchard, played in the meeting," Dara said. "You were talking about posterior circulation stroke protocol." Something flickered across his face. "Not confusion, something closer to resignation. And you're here to redirect me?" he asked quietly. "To remind me that I'm just a confused old man who doesn't know what he's talking about." "No," Dara leaned forward. "I'm here because what you said was accurate, specific. I looked it up. The dosages, the timing windows, the difference between anterior and posterior circulation. That's not word salad, that's advanced neurology." Octavius studied her for a long moment. His hands had stopped trembling. They rested on the journal cover, fingers spread across the title. "Contemporary neurosurgical techniques. Tell me about the protocol," Dara said. "Please, the whole thing." He took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice changed. Not louder, but different, steadier, the voice of someone stepping back into a role they'd been forced to abandon. "Posterior circulation strokes represent approximately 20% of all ischemic strokes, but carry a disproportionately high mortality rate due to delayed recognition and the critical structures affected. The protocol I developed in 1981 focused on rapid identification through the FAST Plus assessment, adding posterior-specific indicators to the standard stroke evaluation. You check for ataxia, dysarthria, diplopia, dysphagia, and drop attacks, the 5DS. Once identified, immediate imaging is critical. But you're looking specifically at the vertebrobasilar system," he continued for 7 minutes. Dara stopped trying to take notes and just listened. Watched his hands move as he described surgical approaches she'd need to verify but suspected were real. He cited medication interactions. Described the difference between thrombotic and embolic posterior circulation events. Explained why basilar artery occlusions required different mechanical intervention than middle cerebral artery strokes. When he finished, the room felt different, smaller and larger at once. "Where did you learn all this?" Dara asked, though she already suspected the answer. "I didn't learn it," Octavius said softly. "I developed it. 42 years ago, at Good Memorial Hospital, I was the chief of neurosurgery." Dara's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled out her phone, opened the browser, typed with shaking fingers. "Octavius Crane, neurosurgeon." The search results loaded. Nothing. Medical directories. No results. Hospital archives. No results. Published research databases. No results. She tried variations. Dr. Octavius Crane. O. Crane Neurology. Crane Stroke Protocol. Nothing, nothing, nothing. "You won't find me," Octavius said, watching her face. "They made sure of that." Dara looked up from her phone. At this elderly man in his cardigan and reading glasses. At his intelligent eyes and steady hands. At the medical journal on his lap and the decades of erasure in his voice. "Who?" she whispered. "Who made sure?" But Octavius just smiled, sad and knowing, and turned back to his window. Where the afternoon light was already beginning to fade, the file was thin. Impossibly thin for a man who'd lived 87 years. Dara spread Octavius's admission paperwork across her kitchen table at 2 in the morning. The pages yellowed at the edges, filled with bureaucratic vagueness that felt deliberate. Under employment history, former hospital worker, under education. Some college, under emergency contact. A daughter's name, Rochelle Crane, with a phone number that had been crossed out and updated twice. Under medical history, a list of medications for hypertension and arthritis, nothing else. No mention of psychiatric treatment, no explanation for why a hospital worker spoke with the precision of a surgeon. The absence felt louder than words. She returned to Meadowbrook the next afternoon with coffee and questions. Octavius sat in his usual chair by the window, afternoon light catching the silver in his hair. When Dara asked about Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, his face shifted. Not confusion, recognition. I was there 5 years, he said quietly, 1978 to 1983. Chief of neurosurgery, though they made me wait 8 years for that title. My white colleagues with half my publications were promoted faster. His hands moved as he spoke, tracing invisible incisions in the air. I developed the posterior circulation stroke protocol during that time. 3 years of research, 217 patients in the initial study. We reduced mortality by 43%, improved functional outcomes in 68% of survivors. The data was irrefutable. Dara leaned forward. What happened to the research, doctor? Harrison Good was very interested in my work. Octavius's voice remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain or perhaps recognition of old betrayal. He was the hospital administrator. MBA from Harvard, not a medical degree, but he understood the value of innovation. He attended my presentations, asked detailed questions, requested copies of my notes for administrative review. He said he wanted to help me publish, to get the recognition I deserved, a bitter smile. He was very convincing. That night Dara searched Harrison Good's name. The results flooded her screen. Dr. Harrison Good, founder of the Good Medical Foundation, celebrated neurologist. Recipient of the Lasker Award for Clinical Research. His breakthrough work. The Good Protocol for Posterior Circulation, Stroke Management. Published in the New England Journal of Medicine in March 1984. Dara clicked through to the paper, her pulse hammering. The methodology was identical to what Octavius had described, the 5DS. The FAST Plus assessment, the vertebrobasilar imaging specifications. Even the medication sequences matched. The only difference was the name on the publication. She checked the timeline. Good's paper was submitted in December 1983, accepted in January 1984. She opened another tab, searched for Octavius Crane in medical licensing databases. The record appeared sparse and damning. License issued 1971, revoked August 1983. Reason: psychiatric evaluation determined unfitness to practice medicine. No details. No appeal noted, just erasure rendered official through clinical language. Dara's hands shook as she dug deeper. Court records from New York, 1983. She found it buried in sealed case archives. Crane v. Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, filed September 1983, sealed by court order October 1983. The case summary was redacted, but the docket number existed. Proof that Octavius had fought back, and proof that someone had made sure that fight disappeared. She needed to talk to his daughter. The current phone number from the admission file rang 4 times before a woman answered, voice cautious. Yes, Ms. Crane, my name is Dara Kim. I'm a nurse at Meadowbrook where your father lives. I need to talk to you about his medical history. Silence stretched across the line. When Rochelle Crane finally spoke, her voice carried exhaustion. My father was sick. Why is he sick? I don't know what he's been telling you. But the doctors were very clear about his condition. What condition? He had delusions. Paranoid episodes. He thought people were stealing from him, claimed he'd done work that wasn't his. The hospital had to let him go for everyone's safety, including his own. He was hospitalized twice for psychiatric evaluation. The second time they revoked his license. Rochelle's words came faster, defensive. I was 26 years old, trying to understand why my brilliant father was falling apart. The doctors showed me the evaluations. They said he needed help, not encouragement for his fantasies. What if they weren't fantasies? Dara kept her voice gentle. What if everything he told you was true? Please don't do this, Rochelle's voice cracked. I spent years accepting what happened. I made peace with having a father who was mentally ill. I don't want this reopened. I can't handle finding out I was wrong about him for 30 years. Ms. Crane, I found records. Dr. Harrison Good published your father's exact research in 1984. The timeline matches. The methodology is identical. Your father filed a lawsuit that was sealed. Someone made sure his truth disappeared. The line went quiet. Dara could hear breathing, ragged and uncertain. My father was sick, Rochelle whispered, but the certainty had drained from her voice. The doctors said he was sick. They had evaluations. They had evidence. What if the evidence was fabricated? What if they silenced him by calling him crazy? I can't. Rochelle's voice broke completely. I can't think about what that means, what I believed about him. What I didn't fight for. A pause. Please leave this alone. The call ended. Dara sat in her dark apartment, staring at her screen where Harrison Good's celebrated face smiled from a foundation website, and understood the full scope of the theft. They hadn't just stolen Octavius's work. They'd stolen his daughter's faith in him. Kenji Park's law office occupied the third floor of a converted brownstone in downtown Providence, its windows overlooking a street where gentrification met resistance in spray-painted murals. Dara sat across from him, watching her college friend scan the timeline she'd compiled. This is circumstantial, Kenji said, but his finger had stopped on the dates. Good publishes in March 1984. Octavius's license revoked November 1983. The lawsuit filed September 1983 and sealed 2 months later. It's not circumstantial when the research is identical. Dara pushed forward the medical journal she'd printed. Octavius described the three-phase protocol to me last week. Good's published methodology matches it exactly. Kenji leaned back, his chair creaking. Unsealing a 40-year-old case isn't simple. We need grounds. Elder abuse investigation. Meadowbrook's director is using Octavius's history against him, claiming he's delusional. His sealed psychiatric records are being weaponized without context. That might work, Kenji made a note. But partial unsealing takes weeks. And there's no guarantee we get the psychiatric evaluations. Then we start with what we can get. The motion was filed on a Tuesday. By Friday, Dara had found an unexpected ally. Iris Beaumont's room was different from the others. Books lined makeshift shelves, legal pads stacked on her desk. A bulletin board covered in newspaper clippings about healthcare reform. The 82-year-old sat in her wheelchair, bifocals catching the afternoon light, and studied Dara with the assessment of someone who'd spent 50 years reading witnesses. You're the one asking questions about Octavius, Iris said, not asking, confirming. How did you know? Because I've been asking questions about this place for 3 years. Iris rolled to her desk, pulled out a thick binder. And you're the first staff member who looks like she might actually listen. The binder opened to reveal meticulous documentation. Dates, times, resident names, staff responses, color-coded tabs marked categories. Medical complaints, safety concerns, behavioral incidents, family communications. Look at February 10th, Iris said. Mrs. Chen, Chinese woman, 79, tells night nurse her chest hurts. Nurse documents resident anxious, seeking attention. No vitals taken. Mrs. Chen has heart attack 6 hours later. Dara's stomach tightened. February 23rd. Mr. Morrison, white man, 81, tells same nurse his chest feels tight. She calls the on-call doctor immediately. He's in the ER within an hour. False alarm, indigestion. The same nurse, same symptom, different response. Iris flipped pages. It's a pattern when Mr. Washington complains about his medication making him dizzy. It's documented as confusion and agitation. When Mrs. Kowalski says the same thing, it's adverse reaction requiring physician consultation. The pages kept turning. 3 years of evidence that what looked like individual judgments formed a systematic pattern. Black and brown residents labeled difficult, confused, attention-seeking. White residents with identical behaviors described as independent, concerned, engaged. Pritchard's really good at it, Iris said, her voice hardening. She uses clinical language, professional assessments. Nothing overtly racist. Just 1,000 small decisions that all break the same direction. Why didn't you report this? To who? The state inspector, who spends 3 hours here once a year. Pritchard's daughter-in-law works at the regulatory agency. Iris closed the binder. I'm 82 years old, in a wheelchair, in a nursing home. People smile and nod and think I'm adorable for being concerned. They don't think I'm documenting civil rights violations. I think that. Dara said quietly. And I think Octavius needs this. Iris's expression softened. Then let's make sure he gets it. The confrontation came Monday morning. Pritchard's office smelled of lavender plugins and ambition. Her desk arranged with the precision of someone who controlled everything within reach. Dara, I've noticed you spending considerable time with Mr. Crane. Pritchard's smile didn't reach her eyes. I'm concerned about professional boundaries. I'm following up on his medical history, his delusions. You mean? Pritchard leaned forward. I understand you lost your grandmother in a care facility. That's difficult. But I worry you're projecting your unresolved feelings onto Mr. Crane's situation. The words landed like a diagnosis. Dara felt her face flush. This isn't projection. Octavius has a documented medical career that nobody bothered to verify. He has a documented psychiatric history that you're choosing to ignore because it's emotionally convenient. Pritchard's voice sharpened. Your grandmother's experience is making you see problems that aren't there. That's not professionalism, Dara. That's trauma response, and dismissing everything he says because of a 40-year-old diagnosis. What's that? Clinical judgment, Pritchard stood. Which I'm beginning to question in your case. I need staff who can maintain objectivity. Consider this a warning. The court's decision arrived Wednesday. Partial unsealing granted. Psychiatric evaluations and witness depositions remain sealed. But original complaint and hospital response released to petitioner's counsel. Kenji called at 6 p.m. You need to see this. The complaint, filed September 15, 1983, was 18 pages of precise documentation. Octavius Crane accused Dr. Harrison Good of systematic theft of research conducted between 1978 and 1983. 5 years of clinical trials, patient outcomes, surgical innovations in stroke rehabilitation. Octavius had documented everything: original notes, patient consent forms, research protocols bearing his signature. Good had published it all under his own name in March 1984. The hospital's response, filed October 3, 1983, was clinically brutal. Dr. Crane was experiencing a psychotic break characterized by paranoid delusions and grandiose thinking. He believed he had developed groundbreaking research that was actually standard hospital protocols. He had become hostile toward Dr. Good, his supervisor, making unfounded accusations. For the safety of patients and staff, Dr. Crane had been placed on administrative leave pending psychiatric evaluation. The final document was dated November 18, 1983, court-ordered psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Richard Pemberton, staff psychiatrist at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Dara read the conclusion twice, her hands shaking. The hospital's own psychiatrist had declared Octavius unfit to practice medicine. The same institution he'd accused of theft had provided the expert who destroyed his credibility. The evaluation that ended his career had been conducted by the people who needed him silenced. The list started with 18 names. Former Columbia Presbyterian staff from 1983, Dara called them all Dr. Patricia Morrison, retired anesthesiologist, said she didn't recall anyone named Octavius Crane. Nurse supervisor James Chen claimed memory loss. Dr. Robert Feinstein hung up when Dara mentioned the 1983 psychiatric evaluation. 3 numbers were disconnected, 5 went straight to voicemail and never returned her calls. By Thursday evening, Dara had crossed off 16 names. Dr. Lennox Whitmore answered on the second ring. His voice was thin, cautious. I saw your message. I don't know what you think I can tell you. You worked under Dr. Crane in the neurosurgery department. You were there in 1983. That was 40 years ago. I barely remember, Dr. Whitmore, your voice is shaking. Dara kept her tone gentle. You were there, you saw something, and it's haunted you ever since, hasn't it? The silence stretched 15 seconds. Then a sound like air escaping from something that had been sealed too long. What do you want from me? The truth, just the truth. Another silence. When Whitmore spoke again, his voice cracked. I was 28 years old. I had student loans. I had a wife and a baby on the way. I told myself I couldn't afford to be a hero. Dara waited. Can you meet me tomorrow? I have some things you need to see. Whitmore's house in Westchester was modest, neat, haunted. He opened the door, looking smaller than his voice suggested. 71 years old, with trembling hands and eyes that hadn't slept well in decades. Come in, please. The living room held careful order, masking careful chaos. Medical journals stacked in precise columns, family photos arranged by year. Everything controlled, except the guilt that radiated from him like fever. I've rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times. Whitmore sat heavily. Never thought I'd actually have it. Start wherever you need to, he nodded. Dr. Crane was brilliant, not just skilled, brilliant. He saw patterns in stroke recovery that no one else noticed. He developed these protocols, rehabilitation techniques that helped patients regain function we'd been taught was permanently lost. He documented everything meticulously, research notebooks filled with observations, outcomes, theories, and Dr. Good was hospital administrator. He made rounds with the department heads, observed procedures. Professional development, he called it. Whitmore's hands tightened. I worked late shifts. Twice I saw him in Dr. Crane's office after midnight. The second time, he had Dr. Crane's research notebooks spread across the desk. He was photographing every page. You saw him stealing the research. I saw him documenting it. That's what I told myself. Maybe Dr. Crane had asked him to make copies. Maybe it was legitimate collaboration. Whitmore's voice went hollow. I knew better. But I was a resident, good controlled recommendations, fellowship placements. Speaking up meant career suicide. What happened next, Dr. Crane started getting suspicious. He noticed things moved in his office, pages marked differently. In August 1983, he confronted Good directly. I wasn't in the room, but I heard about it. Dr. Crane had evidence, dates, proof that his research was being copied. He threatened to go to the medical board. Whitmore stood, walked to a filing cabinet. His hands shook worse now. 3 days later, Dr. Crane was ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation. Hospital administration said there had been concerns about his mental state. Erratic behavior, paranoid accusations against a respected colleague. The evaluation was conducted by Dr. Richard Pemberton, staff psychiatrist, who declared him unfit to practice, who destroyed him. Whitmore pulled out a folder. Held it like something radioactive. Pemberton was Good's former medical school roommate. They played golf together every Sunday. 1 month after signing that evaluation, Pemberton received a research position at the hospital with a 40% salary increase. Dara felt her chest tighten. The psychiatric report said Dr. Crane exhibited grandiose delusions, claimed credit for standard hospital protocols, showed paranoid fixation on Dr. Good. It painted him as dangerously unstable. The medical board revoked his license. He spent the next 2 years trying to appeal. But who believes the crazy doctor over the respected administrator? And you stayed silent. I told myself I had no proof. That my testimony would be dismissed as a disgruntled resident. That I had a family to support. Whitmore's voice broke. I told myself a lot of things. None of them were true. I was a coward. He opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, pages yellowed with age but text still clear. Handwritten notes in precise script, dates in the upper corners. March 1981, July 1981, January 1982, November 1982. Dr. Crane's original surgical protocols. I made copies before everything disappeared. I told myself I'd come forward when the time was right, when I had tenure. When I was established enough that they couldn't destroy me too, he laughed bitterly. The time was never right. 40 years and I've kept these in my filing cabinet like evidence at a crime scene I refuse to report. Dara spread the pages carefully. Octavius's handwriting covered every sheet, detailed observations, patient outcomes. Theoretical frameworks, dated 2 to 3 years before Good's publication. This is proof, physical proof that predates everything. It's more than that. It's my confession. Whitmore handed her another document, freshly printed. Sworn affidavit signed this morning, eyewitness doctor. Harrison Good systematically steal the research of Dr. Octavius Crane and use institutional power to silence him when he attempted to expose the theft. I remained silent out of cowardice and career preservation. I am coming forward now to state unequivocally that Dr. Octavius Crane was not delusional, he was telling the truth. And we destroyed him for it. Dara read it twice, her vision blurring. I have cancer, Whitmore said quietly. Stage 4, 6 months, maybe 8. I've spent 40 years being the doctor who stayed silent. I'd like to spend my last months being the man who finally told the truth. Thank you. This changes everything. There's one more thing. Whitmore's expression darkened. Dr. Pemberton, the psychiatrist who declared Dr. Crane unfit. He wasn't just Good's former roommate. After that research position, he became a regular consultant for the hospital's credentialing committee. Any doctor who threatened to expose misconduct suddenly developed concerning psychiatric symptoms requiring evaluation. Pemberton conducted 12 such evaluations between 1984 and 1997. 11 resulted in license suspension or revocation. 10 of those doctors were people of color. The boardroom at Meadowbrook Senior Living smelled of furniture polish and barely concealed panic. Dara spread the documents across the mahogany table with hands that trembled despite her rehearsed calm. 6 board members leaned forward, their faces illuminated by the afternoon light filtering through vertical blinds. These are Dr. Octavius Crane's original surgical protocols. She placed the yellowed pages in chronological order. Handwritten, dated 1981 and 1982, 2 full years before Dr. Harrison Good published identical procedures under his own name. Board Chairman Douglas Mercer picked up the nearest page, squinting at the careful notations. His wedding ring clicked against the paper edge. This handwriting is remarkably detailed because Dr. Crane was remarkably brilliant. Dara laid down the affidavit. This is sworn testimony from Dr. Lennox Whitmore, who was a resident at Columbia Presbyterian in 1983. He witnessed Good copying Dr. Crane's research. He watched the institutional machinery activate to silence a black doctor who threatened to expose theft, Margaret Chen. The only woman besides Pritchard on the board exhaled sharply. These are extraordinary allegations, supported by extraordinary evidence. Dara presented the timeline she'd constructed. April 1983, Dr. Crane requests meeting with Hospital Ethics Board. May 1983, he's ordered to undergo psychiatric evaluation. June 1983, declared mentally unfit. August 1983, license suspended. March 1984, Good publishes research. The sequence isn't coincidental. Vanessa Pritchard hadn't moved since the presentation began. She sat at the opposite end of the table, spine straight, fingers steepled beneath her chin. Her designer glasses caught the light, making her eyes unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the patient tone reserved for correcting children. This is deeply concerning, not the allegations, which are tragic but unverifiable. What concerns me is the psychological state of the nurse making them. Dara's stomach clenched. Dara lost her grandmother 2 years ago in a facility not unlike ours. Pritchard opened her own folder with practiced precision. The death was traumatic. Dara blamed herself for not advocating more forcefully. Since joining Meadowbrook, she's displayed what I can only describe as a savior complex. particularly toward residents of color. That's not what this is about. Dara's voice emerged sharper than intended. Isn't it? Pritchard slid a document toward the board. 3 months ago, Dara filed complaints about medication timing for Mrs. Beaumont. Investigation showed no protocol violations. 6 weeks ago, she questioned dietary restrictions for Mr. Hassan. Again, no violations. She sees conspiracies in standard care because she's projecting unresolved trauma onto professional situations. Douglas Mercer frowned at the complaints. These do show a pattern of accusations, a pattern of advocacy, Dara countered. Mrs. Beaumont's medication schedule was changed after my complaint. Even if you didn't call it a violation, Pritchard's smile didn't reach her eyes. And now we arrive at Mr. Crane. Dara believes his occasional coherent statements about medical procedures prove he's a secretly brilliant doctor. The simpler explanation is that he's repeating things he's heard or read. Dementia patients often have islands of clarity where they parrot information convincingly. These aren't parroted phrases. They're complex surgical innovations, which he could have read about. Pritchard produced another document. I've documented Mr. Crane's actual behavioral patterns. May 15th, physical altercation with orderly Marcus Chen. May 22nd, paranoid accusations that staff were stealing his research. June 3rd, aggressive outburst during medication administration. Dara snatched the incident reports. The dates blurred together, all recent, all conveniently filed after she'd begun investigating. These are fabricated. I work with Mr. Crane daily. He's never been violent. Your emotional attachment prevents objective assessment. Pritchard's voice remained maddeningly calm. This is exactly why we have administrative oversight. Nurses get close to patients, lose perspective. They start believing delusions because they want to believe. Margaret Chen looked between them uncertainly. The historical evidence Dara's presented does seem compelling. 40-year-old allegations. Douglas Mercer set down the timeline. Against a dead doctor who can't defend himself, supported by a dying man seeking redemption. I'm sympathetic to the narrative. But we can't destroy a professional's career on this foundation. The fluorescent lights buzzed in the silence. Dara felt the room tilting away from her, the board's sympathy curdling into institutional protectionism. She'd known this moment would come. She'd prepared for it. I've already contacted the state medical board. Her voice steadied as Pritchard's face froze. They're opening a formal investigation into Dr. Crane's original license suspension. I've also reached out to the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice regarding patterns of discriminatory treatment in elder care facilities. You did what? Pritchard's composure cracked like ice under pressure. And I spoke with Simone Torres, the investigative journalist who's been covering medical racism. She's very interested in the story of a pioneering black neurosurgeon erased from history. And the nursing home director who continued his silencing 40 years later. Pritchard stood abruptly. Chair scraping against floor. You've destroyed your career over a confused old man's fantasies. Do you understand that? I will sue you personally for defamation. I will ensure you never work in healthcare again. Sue me with what defense? Dara held up Lennox's affidavit. The truth, the board will hear about this gross insubordination. Pritchard's professional mask had shattered entirely. Going to the media before following proper channels, making wild accusations. Harassing a respected administrator, Douglas Mercer raised both hands. Everyone needs to calm down. This has escalated beyond anything we can resolve today. He looked at Pritchard, then Dara, his expression pained. We're calling an emergency executive session. Both of you are suspended pending investigation. Full pay, no patient contact, no public statements. You're suspending me. Pritchard's voice climbed an octave. We're suspending both of you, Margaret Chen clarified. Until we determine what actually happened. Dara gathered her documents with numb fingers. She'd expected termination, not this liminal space where nothing was decided. Pritchard stood frozen at the window, staring at her own reflection in the glass. Outside, The late afternoon sun painted Meadowbrook's lawn in golden light that didn't penetrate the boardroom's fluorescent chill. The conference room at the State Medical Board smelled of old coffee and newer anxiety. 3 neurosurgeons sat across from Octavius Crane, their credentials a combined century of surgical excellence. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, chief of neurosurgery at Mass General, slid a diagram across the table. Dr. Crane, can you walk us through your approach to temporal lobe access in acute stroke intervention? Octavius's hands trembled as he picked up the pen, then steadied as muscle memory took over. His fingers moved across the paper with the precision of a man who'd performed the procedure hundreds of times in his mind during decades of forced silence. The traditional approach risks collateral damage to Wernicke's area, he said, his voice soft but certain. I developed a lateral trajectory that preserves language function while maintaining surgical access. The key is understanding that stroke damage follows vascular maps, not anatomical convenience. He drew for 17 minutes without stopping, explaining angles and approaches while the neurosurgeons leaned forward, their skepticism dissolving into something like awe. Dr. James Chen, who'd published extensively on stroke rehabilitation, interrupted. This is the good protocol. You're describing it exactly. I'm describing my protocol, Octavius corrected gently. Harrison Good described it after he stole it. The evaluation lasted 3 days. They brought case studies, current research, theoretical scenarios. Octavius answered everything, but more than that, he improved on it. When Okonkwo showed him a 2019 paper on using microcatheter technology in stroke intervention, Octavius studied it for 20 minutes, then suggested an integration with his original approach that made Chen actually gasp. You're not just remembering, Chen said. You've been following the literature. Dara brings me journals. Octavius's eyes found the young nurse sitting quietly in the corner. For 40 years, people told me I was confused. But I knew what I knew. I just kept learning, kept reading, kept hoping someone would eventually listen. On the 3rd day, Okonkwo delivered the evaluation to the full medical board. Dara watched from the gallery as the lead neurosurgeon spoke words that Octavius had waited 4 decades to hear. Dr. Crane's understanding is not only legitimate but sophisticated. His knowledge base is comprehensive and current. He's been following medical literature for decades and can integrate modern advances into his original framework with remarkable insight. Okonkwo paused, her professional composure cracking slightly. Frankly, his mind is sharper than many practicing surgeons half his age. The 1983 psychiatric evaluation that deemed him mentally unfit was either grossly incompetent or deliberately fraudulent. The words hung in the air like vindication made solid. While the medical board worked, the Department of Justice investigation had been excavating Meadowbrook's foundations. The statistical patterns emerged with damning clarity. Black residents were prescribed psychotropic medications at 3 times the rate of white residents. Cognitive assessments showed identical objective scores, but Black residents were consistently rated lower in subjective categories like cooperation and clarity of thought. Family contact rates told their own story. Black families received calls about placement in memory care at rates that made the pattern undeniable. Then the emails surfaced. Federal investigators found Pritchard's correspondence going back 7 years. The coded language was everywhere, a professional veneer over institutional racism. Black residents who complained were demanding and difficult. White residents exhibiting identical behaviors were advocating for their needs or appropriately concerned about their care. Mrs. Beaumont, who'd questioned medication changes, was non-compliant and resistant to treatment protocols. Mr. Henderson, who'd asked about billing errors, showed paranoid tendencies requiring psychiatric consultation, but the most damning email came from 2 years earlier. Sent to all staff after a family had filed a complaint alleging racial discrimination. Team, we need to be mindful of certain residents who claim racism when we're simply maintaining professional standards. Document everything. These accusations are serious, and we need to protect ourselves by showing consistent application of protocols. Remember, emotional reactions are not evidence of institutional bias. The email had been sent the same week Pritchard had increased psychotropic medications for 3 black residents, including Octavius. The Good Medical Foundation audit ran parallel to the DOJ investigation, and what it revealed destroyed a legacy. Harrison Good's entire career, his reputation as a pioneering neurosurgeon. His foundation worth $40 million, all of it traced back to a single source. Octavius Crane's stolen research from 1983. Every subsequent publication Good had produced was derivative. Incremental variations that any competent researcher could have developed. Without Octavius's revolutionary foundation, Good would have been ordinary. With it, he'd built an empire. The auditors found the original surgical notes in a locked file in Good's personal office. Octavius's handwriting still visible in the margins. He'd kept them like trophies. Rochelle Crane arrived at Meadowbrook on a Thursday afternoon, carrying the medical board's official evaluation. She found her father in his room, reading a neurology journal Dara had brought that morning. "Daddy," her voice broke on the word. Octavius looked up, and something in his daughter's face made him carefully mark his place and set the journal aside. Rochelle sat in the chair beside his bed, the evaluation trembling in her hands. She'd read it 3 times in the car, each reading hitting harder than the last. "I'm so sorry," the words came out strangled. "I'm so sorry, Daddy. All those years you tried to tell me, and I thought they were right. I thought you were confused. I thought the doctors knew better than you did." She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming. "I should have believed you. I should have fought for you. I'm your daughter. And I should have believed you." Octavius reached out with his trembling hands and took hers. Steady despite the tremor. "You were a child when they took me," he said softly. "They were very convincing. They had authority and credentials and institutional power. You had a father they'd labeled crazy." He squeezed her fingers. "I never blamed you, baby girl. I blamed the system that made my truth sound like delusion." They sat together as afternoon light slanted through the window. 40 years of stolen relationship compressed into this single moment of recognition. The next morning, Dara received a call from the medical board's investigation coordinator. The message was brief but seismic. Harrison Good was alive, 91 years old, living in a private care facility in Connecticut. He'd been following news of the investigation through his attorney. He wanted to meet with Octavius Crane. The conference room at Good's attorney's office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The kind of view that reminded visitors who held power. 3 lawyers in identical Navy suits sat across from Octavius, Rochelle, and Dara. The senior partner slid a document across the polished table. $8 million, he said smoothly. Full medical care for life at any facility of your choosing. A private apology from Dr. Good. All we ask is discretion. Dara watched Octavius's hands, steady on the table despite their tremor. He didn't touch the document. "You want to buy my silence," Octavius said softly. Again, the lawyer's smile tightened. "We're offering you comfort and security for your remaining years, Doctor. Crane, litigation would take years you don't have. This resolves everything quietly." Quietly, Octavius pushed the document back across the table. "I've been quiet for 40 years. Every time I told the truth, they called it delusion. Every time I remembered my own work, they called it confusion. Every time I tried to speak, they medicated me into silence." His voice remained gentle. But something in it made the lawyers shift. "I don't want his money. I want my name back. I want the truth told where everyone can hear it." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. And the story exploded across medical news sites and social media. A pioneering black neurosurgeon erased for 40 years. Stolen research built into an empire, institutional racism disguised as psychiatric care. The hearing room filled 2 hours before start time, medical professionals and journalists crowding every seat. Octavius sat at the witness table in a borrowed suit, his reading glasses on their 45-year-old chain. The medical board chairman nodded to him. "Dr. Crane, you may begin." Octavius didn't start with the theft. He started with the work. "The Crane Protocol for Accelerated Stroke Rehabilitation," he said, his soft voice carrying in the silent room, "is based on the principle of neuroplastic window maximization during the acute post-ischemic period, for 47 minutes. He spoke. No notes, no hesitation. He walked through patient selection criteria, intervention timing, the specific combination of physical therapy and targeted pharmaceutical support. He cited outcome data from his 1982 clinical trial, described procedural refinements he developed through 53 cases, explained the theoretical basis in neural pathway reformation. His hands moved as he talked, muscle memory tracing surgical approaches in the air. A doctor in the third row was filming on her phone, tears streaming down her face. Another sat with his mouth open, several scribbled notes frantically. The audience wasn't just listening, they were witnessing. When Octavius finished, the silence lasted 10 full seconds. "That," he said quietly, "is what they called confused rambling. That is what Harrison Good published under his name in 1984. That is what I've remembered perfectly for 40 years while being told my memories were delusions." His voice remained steady. But Rochelle gripped the armrest beside Dara. "In 1983, I was a neurosurgeon with a revolutionary protocol and patient outcomes that spoke for themselves. I had documentation, surgical notes, a clinical trial ready for publication. Harrison Good was my hospital administrator. He told me he'd help me publish. Instead, he took my research, had me declared mentally unfit through a psychiatric evaluation he arranged, and stripped my medical license before I could fight back. For 40 years, telling the truth was called delusion. Remembering my own work was called confusion. Every facility I entered, every doctor who saw my records, they all believed the diagnosis more than they believed me." Good's lawyer stood. "Dr. Crane's mental health history speaks for itself. I'd like to testify," Lennox Whitmore said from the audience. His voice cracked. "I was there. I watched it happen." Lennox walked to the stand with the careful steps of a man carrying 40 years of weight. His hands trembled worse than Octavius's as he placed them on the table. "I was a resident in 1983, he said. "I saw Dr. Crane's surgical notes. I watched his outcomes. I knew the protocol was his." His voice broke. "I watched Good take credit. I watched them declare Octavius unfit. I said nothing. That silence protected my career and destroyed his. I've kept his original surgical notes for 40 years because I couldn't bear to destroy them. But I was too much of a coward to come forward." 2 other doctors approached the stand after Lennox. They described watching Good take credit for residents' research, seeing him manipulate authorship on publications, witnessing his pattern of targeting black colleagues who threatened his reputation. The pattern was undeniable. The medical board chairman read the decision at 4:30 that afternoon. Octavius's medical license was restored. All publications would be corrected to list him as primary researcher. The Good Medical Foundation would be restructured under independent oversight. And Vanessa Pritchard's nursing license was permanently revoked, with federal civil rights charges filed for her documented pattern of discrimination. Rochelle embraced her father in the hallway outside, both of them crying. 40 years, she whispered. "Daddy, 40 years, but not 41, Octavius said softly. "Not anymore." 3 days later, Dara's phone rang. The Journal of Neurosurgery wanted to publish Octavius's complete protocols under his name, with a historical commentary about medical racism and stolen research. But the editor had one more question. They'd found something else in the archives, another set of notes in Octavius's handwriting from 1982. Something about early Alzheimer's intervention that was decades ahead of current research. Did Dr. Crane remember those protocols too? 6 months later, Octavius sat at the head of a conference table in a bright apartment he shared with Rochelle. Sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a community garden instead of institutional hallways. His trembling hands rested on a stack of folders labeled Elder Voice Initiative. And his reading glasses, the same ones he'd worn for 45 years, caught the light as he reviewed training materials. The pattern is always the same, he told the 15 healthcare workers gathered around the table. Dara stood beside him, no longer wearing scrubs but a blazer that marked her new role as program director. She'd left institutional nursing 3 months earlier, determined to build something better than the systems that had failed her grandmother and nearly erased Octavius entirely. Dara clicked a remote, and Vanessa Pritchard's voice filled the room. The audio was from that staff meeting 6 months ago, dripping with contempt. Mr. Crane spent 20 minutes yesterday describing something he called microsurgical anastomosis for cerebrovascular reconstruction. This is exactly the kind of confused rambling we cannot indulge. Several trainees shifted uncomfortably. The mockery was unmistakable. Microsurgical anastomosis, Octavius said quietly, is the surgical reconnection of blood vessels using microscopic technique. Cerebrovascular reconstruction refers to repairing damaged vessels in the brain. I was describing a procedure I performed 847 times between 1978 and 1983. He paused. Every word was medically accurate. Every word was dismissed as confusion. A young nurse raised her hand. How do we know the difference between actual confusion and complexity we don't understand? You verify, Dara said. You investigate. You ask questions instead of making assumptions. She advanced the presentation to show case after case from the Elder Voice Initiative, elderly patients whose delusions turned out to be accurate memories, whose paranoia was justified concern, whose confusion was clarity no one bothered to confirm. But Octavius had more to share than teaching materials. From a locked drawer he withdrew a leather journal, its pages yellowed but the handwriting still precise. I never published everything, he said. In 1982, I developed a preventive protocol. Not rehabilitation after stroke, but intervention before. Identifying vascular risk patterns through specific biomarkers and implementing targeted prevention. His voice strengthened. With 1982 technology, I couldn't prove it definitively. But now 3 young neurosurgeons sat forward. Dr. Maya Patel had reached out after the hearing, bringing colleagues who specialized in stroke prevention. The biomarkers you identified, she said, studying his notes, we can measure those now. We have imaging technology you couldn't access, Dr. Crane. This protocol could be revolutionary. Octavius's hands steadied as he opened the journal, muscle memory taking over. For the next hour, he outlined a preventive approach that made the neurosurgeons scramble to take notes. Early intervention strategies, risk assessment protocols, targeted treatments that could prevent strokes before they occurred. How long have you been carrying this? Rochelle asked softly from the doorway. She'd taken a sabbatical from teaching to help her father transition, making up for years when she'd been taught to doubt him. 40 years, Octavius said, waiting to be heard. The partnership formed that afternoon. Octavius would consult, providing the theoretical framework he'd developed decades ago. The young neurosurgeons would apply modern technology to prove what he'd always known was possible. Clinical trials were already being designed, but his primary work remained teaching. Octavius traveled to hospitals and nursing homes, training staff to recognize their own biases. He played Pritchard's audio mockery, then dissected each statement she'd dismissed. Cerebrovascular reconstruction, penumbral tissue preservation, collateral circulation enhancement, every phrase medically precise. Every phrase ignored. When an elderly person speaks and you don't understand, he told each new group of trainees, the question isn't whether they're confused. The question is whether you're listening. His protocols spread. Medical schools added his stroke rehabilitation techniques to their curricula. His photo finally appearing in textbooks beside procedures that bore his name. Research papers were corrected, citations restored. The invisible doctor became visible. Iris Beaumont. Her documentation of institutional patterns having proven crucial to the federal investigation. Now consulted for the Department of Justice. She reviewed elder care facilities nationwide, identifying the same dismissive patterns she'd witnessed at Meadowbrook. On a Tuesday morning, Octavius sat in a research lab with his neurosurgery team, reviewing preliminary data from the preventive protocol trials. He was 87 years old, hands trembling as he made notes in margins, mind sharp as ever. Finally doing the work he was always meant to do. Early results show 67% reduction in stroke risk, Dr. Patel said, her voice awed. Dr. Crane, you were right. You were always right. Octavius looked up, sunlight streaming through laboratory windows. I know, he said simply. I just needed someone to listen.